Welcome to the Wealth Setting Podcast. This is episode 461. Today is January 28th, 2025. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm also the founder, money manager at investablewealth.com. Well, hey, real quick episode for you. I tried to get this in yesterday during all the panic and hysteria around the Chinese AI large language model, DeepSeek. And I didn't have the time to get in yesterday, and I'm barely squeezing it in today here. So much of the panic has already subsided. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the big panic that we had during the banking crisis of, was it March, April of 2023? There was a huge amount of panic that the entire financial system was going to collapse, and I think that lasted about a weekend. In any case, I tried to get ahead of some of this hysteria with the episode I released over the weekend, which, if you notice the title, it was directly directed at artificial intelligence. It was started out with the two words, beyond AI. And the point that I made in that episode, and if you haven't listened to it, go back and check it out. That's episode 460. But the point I make there is that the U.S. economy, I believe, is strong and vibrant, going to obviously go through ups and downs. And from day to day, I have no idea the direction or the performance of the stock market, but long term, and I'm talking 5, 10, 15 or more years, I think we are in a golden age of a confluence of technologies where industrialization is being merged with technology. So much like we saw advances in oil exploration cause the United States to become the number one producer of oil after we had floundered for a generation, I think the same analogy can be applied to much of the problems that we face today. You hear that the government deficits and budget can't ever be reduced because 80 or more % of it is entitlement spending. Well, I agree with the fact that it is entitlements and entitlements aren't getting cut, but there's also so much waste and abuse in things like Medicare and Medicaid and education. Probably two of the most broken markets over the last 50 years or more in the United States have been education and medicine. And what technology did for oil exploration in terms of horizontal drilling and fracking, I think will eventually be applied to things like education and medicine and healthcare. And it'll not only drastically reduce the cost, which will help the government deficit, but it will also have better outcomes. Again, just like we've seen with the oil industry. Listen, all my life I've heard that we're running out of fossil fuels and, in the next 5 or 10 years, there's not going to be any more oil left. Well, that's not ever been the case. And not only does the United States especially have plenty of natural gas right now for probably like 100 years worth of use, but the cost in terms of inflationary adjusted dollars is actually lower than it had been before. And that's the whole point of technology, and thus my overall enthusiasm and optimism about technology and its implementation. And I'm not talking crazy Cathie Wood exponential growth technologies. I'm just talking about everyday life getting better. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have practically any of the technologies we have today. The first computer I purchased was in 1987. That was the most expensive computer that I bought, not only in terms of inflationary dollars, but in terms of nominal cost. That thing cost a fortune, and it did virtually nothing. Now, this is a long time ago, so I may be conflating some things, but as I remember it, that computer only had enough BIOS RAM in it to start up. The operating system, as I remember, was on a floppy disk. So you had like 2 disk drives. You put in one disk to actually run the system, and the other floppy you put in was to run your ancillary programs or to store your data. I can remember when that computer came in the mail. I ordered it through mail order, and this is, again, long before there was ever a Amazon or Best Buy type stores. I had to order it from a specialty computer catalog. It was delivered to me, and I got home from school that day, assembled it, put it all together, and started loading my programs in it. And I was up till 2 or 3 in the morning, so excited to get to run a spreadsheet or a word processing program. And again, this is long before there was Windows or Excel or any things we have today. I used, as a word processor, I used WordPerfect, and as a spreadsheet, I used something called Lotus 123. By the way, back in the day, I was in school learning how to program on a mainframe computer, Fortran, okay, which is kind of like hieroglyphics today. In any case, that computer system did virtually nothing. When I talk about a spreadsheet, it didn't even produce graphs or charts. Back in those days when I started investing, I would have to take the closing week's numbers from the Sunday paper, and I took engineering graph paper, and I, by hand and a calculator, I plotted out the weekly moving averages and then drew it in with a French curve. I couldn't even use a computer to draw graphics at that point because it just, was a system that I couldn't have afforded. And I remember when I got the first actual hard drive for that computer, which I didn't buy initially with it because it probably was, 20 or 30 or more percent of the overall cost of the system. But when I finally got around to getting a hard drive for it, again, it's murky, I don't remember exactly, but it was something like 10 or 20, are you ready for this? 10 or 20 megabytes. Now, this podcast episode in MP3 format is probably going to consume about 10 megabytes. So that gives you some kind of an idea of how bad storage was back in those days. But you know what? I literally remember getting that, and again, being so excited to install it so that I didn't have to keep flopping floppy drives in and out of the system. And hey, if you're old enough like me to remember this, remember the days when we had the big floppy drives, I don't know what they were, 5¼ inches or something, and we would cut a notch out in the envelope that contained the floppy drive, would cut a little notch out on the opposite side and then flip it over and use the back of the floppy that you really weren't supposed to do, but would use that to save money and double our memory storage. Yeah, that's how old I am. In any case, I remember getting that hard drive though, and whether it was 10 or 20 megs, I don't remember, but I thought to myself, in a lifetime, I will never fill this storage up with data. Because that's how small files were back then, again, because they did virtually nothing. Well, it didn't take too long before I did fill that up, right? And it just kept growing and growing, and then you could produce charts and graphs in the spreadsheets, and you could integrate visual pictures through, and I don't remember if it was JPEG files back then or whatever it was, but they took an inordinate amount of memory. And then, oh my goodness, audio files came along. And that was probably actually 10 years later. Oh, and then video files. And so look at where we are today with all the massive storage. My point in this is reminding you that technology is ever changing and growing. And I kind of find it amusing that everybody's losing their mind over DeepSeek. This is the natural progression of things. The whole point of technology and why it improves the human condition is because technology reduces variable cost. Technology is anti-inflationary. Of course, something better was going to come along than ChatGPT or Anthropic. And by the way, if you look at today's title episode, listen to what I'm saying there. DeepSeek is good for everybody except these few large language model developers. Yeah, probably not so good for OpenAI or Anthropic. But you know who it's good for? It's good for everybody else because it reduces the cost. It reduces the power consumption. It reduces the cost not only operationally, but also in terms of fixed cost to get into it. And let me step back here a second. I'm taking everything that we've heard so far at face value. I want to caution people on that because let me remind you, this is coming out of China, and I think you should always be at least at a minimum a little skeptical of what's said by the Chinese because, well, I'll just leave it at that. In any case, assuming that it's as good as it says it is, then artificial intelligence just got better for everybody. And this wasn't created out of a vacuum. It's open source. The developers of DeepSeek took other open source software and figured out how to make it better and run faster and more efficiently and work on lower cost chips and consume less power. Again, that's the way technology works. And again, as I look at the stock market today, a lot of things that really sold off the last few, as of yesterday, have recovered, although not all the way. One of the areas that's been especially hard hit is utilities and generally electrification stocks in general, and specifically nuclear stocks. But even just the whole utility industry, the whole electrification industry, actually not even electrification, if you look at natural gas pipelines, all those things have been really badly hit over the last 2 days. I personally think this is one of the most knee-jerk reactions I've ever seen. Again, go back and listen to the episode I did over the weekend. The United States is expanding its manufacturing base. We need more power whether we use artificial intelligence or not. The fact that DeepSeek maybe uses less power doesn't mean we're not going to use an expansive amount of electricity in the future. In fact, I think the argument can be made that something like DeepSeek will actually cause us to use more power faster than we otherwise would have. And it's because of that reduction in cost and reduction in energy use. Individually, they're claiming that DeepSeek can operate at, say, 40% of the power capacity of something like ChatGPT. Now, the numbers for this are all over the board. But again, from what I read, something like a ChatGPT consumes 10 to 30 times as much power as a regular Google search would be. Okay, and the genie is out of the bottle in terms of large language models, right? People aren't going to be happy with just regular old Google searches. They're going to want to use AI to write their essays and draw pictures of cats and penguins and all these other elaborate things. So I think that 10 to 30 times energy usage is actually going to be even much more than what people have estimated. But let's just take the low end of it. Let's say that an AI search is going to use 10 times as much energy as a traditional Google search would if you used ChatGPT. And now DeepSeek comes along and it's claiming to operate 40% more efficient. So that still takes the number to 4 times as much to run a DeepSeek search as just a plain old Google search. If that's true, then again, that's good news because that will spur adaptation of the technology, not only because it costs less to get into, but it costs less to operate. And so while individually the energy use goes down, my argument would be that in aggregate, it could cause artificial intelligence to get adopted faster and at a greater magnitude than it otherwise would have. So potentially we're going to end up putting more strain on the grid faster than we would have otherwise. I don't know. Just something to think about. I'm looking at a lot of these stocks that have really been beaten down. I'm letting the dust settle. But overall, my theme of industrialization and technology, it all comes back to electrification of the grid. That includes not only the utilities and maybe we move more into nuclear power, but it's also the nuts and bolts of the sensors and the transformers and all the other components, all the way down to the copper wire that you need in an electrical grid. So I'm definitely looking at areas of my current portfolio where I can prune some stock positions to come up with a little bit more money to potentially put into more electrification stocks or to possibly add to ones that I already have. Watch the blog over at investablewealth.com. If I do that, I'll obviously announce it there. Let me give you one more analogy before we close this out. Let's go back about 120, 130 years ago to when another new technology come out, and that was called air conditioning. Air conditioning wasn't originally invented so people's houses could be cool. It was invented for an industrial application. I believe it was either a paper mill or a printing press where they wanted to remove the humidity from the air. That was the original emphasis for the guy that invented it, Carrier, for him to come up with air conditioning. So it was originally done for industrial applications. And that would have been the only people that could have afforded it, right? Big industrial operations, the robber barons of those days, trying to make their operations more efficient by using lower humidity and lower temperatures to improve their manufacturing process. Well, as it got implemented, then, hey, the comfort factor came into it as well. But the regular guy wasn't putting air conditioning in his house, right? It was going into the homes of either rich people or even before then, into commercial operations, things like movie theaters or restaurants or hotels. Eventually, though, it trickled down and the price came down enough for the average person to be able to buy it and put it in their home. So right as newer technologies and lower cost applications of air conditioning came about, it spurred more competition. The units, even as of today, every new model comes out, uses less and less energy. That causes more of an adoption rate. And so you get this virtuous cycle of even though each air conditioning unit is using less energy, there are more people using air conditioning. and thus more units are sold and a whole lot more energy is consumed. Again, I think you can draw that same analogy to artificial intelligence, and the good news is that something like DeepSeek, if it really works as good as they say it is, it's going to spur adoption and cause even more energy consumption. And think of, the last 130 years of air conditioning. Yeah, you could have made a lot of money investing in the right air conditioning companies. Just like potentially you can still make a lot of money investing in NVIDIA or AMD or Broadcom or, whatever these other semiconductor manufacturers are, because even though supposedly DeepSeek was created using much less expensive silicon chips, it still used NVIDIA chips, which are not inexpensive, right? And they're not the big Blackwell, $100,000 ones, but they're certainly probably at least still $10,000 type chips. It's not something you're going to run out and put in your tablet. And it's definitely not some cheap Internet of Things chip circuit board that's in the ice maker in your refrigerator. And we're still talking top of the line performance here. And so as artificial intelligence continues to grow, just as air conditioning use continue to grow, yeah, you can make money in the hardware, but you know where you're really going to make money? Probably in those ancillary areas. And again, think about air conditioning. While there was a lot of money made in the components of air conditioning, look at how air conditioning totally changed society, not only just from the manufacturing process of what we could now do indoors, but also the comfort level of where people lived and worked and went to their offices. And you have entire communities, entire states, like the state of Florida, Nevada, Arizona. I mean, had it not been for air conditioning, these places would have never been developed. So what about the money made and the economic systems that formed, from casinos to golf courses to infrastructure? I mean, we're talking literally trillions of dollars of GDP are created in states that otherwise wouldn't have been inhabited without air conditioning. We're going to see artificial intelligence take on that same society-changing applications. We're going to be able to do things with robotics and automation and other digitization processes that up to this point we couldn't have been able to do and we wouldn't even be able to imagine. So no, I don't think DeepSeek is killing the U.S. AI industry. I think it's going to enhance it. And I don't think it's the only innovation that's coming out. Be prepared for more. You should probably look for those ancillary or those second or third derivative applications of the industries that it can apply artificial intelligence, because that's where the real money is going to be made. Cheaper, lower cost, more energy efficient artificial intelligence means that everybody from small businesses to, the Adobes and Salesforce and Uber and Shopify and MicroStrategies and everybody else that is using technology, which is everybody, right? Everybody that's using technology in their enterprise, from large businesses to small businesses to governments and everybody in between, it's all going to get more efficient, more productive, and that ultimately means higher profits and a higher standard of living for people that can earn those profits. So, does DeepSeek scare me, depress me, cause me to want to get out of the market? Absolutely not. Like I said, keep an eye over at investablewealth.com on the blog post alert notification page over there. You're very likely to see me adding some new or doubling down on positions in my portfolio in the coming days. Well, hey, as always, until next time, this is John Pugliano wishing you the very best returns.